the Evolution Security Podcast.
Welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast, where we give you the knowledge and live training to protect yourself, your family, and your country. This episode is brought to you in part by Tenacor. Tenacor is an American design, development, manufacturing, and training company building products that work. They are innovators that come from a law enforcement and training background with years of experience. We would specifically suggest that you look at the new Velo 4 AWIB holster. Everyone on this podcast owns one and uses it regularly. For 10% off your purchase, use the code EVOSEC at checkout. That's EVOSEC at checkout for 10% off. Lastly, if you like what you hear here, please give us a review. It really helps to keep up our ratings and get the word out to others. You can find us online on Instagram at EVOSECUSA and Facebook, also EVOSECUSA, or visit our website, evosec.org. That's evosec.org, where you can find bios of the staff and links to upcoming events and trainings. Now for the show.
Hey, everybody. Aaron Davis here. I would like to go ahead and thank everybody for listening to Evolution Security. And I would just like to say that my great co-hosts have given me quite a bit of leeway here in an intro, so I'd like to say I'm going to do and play a little bit of jazz, so to speak. Now, in the spirit of our great guest, a gentleman named Ryan Mayfield. Now, he lives a life of what we would call a classical liberal education, and I'd like to quote him he says, "Pursue everything." And I can say that we at Evolution Security agree with him wholeheartedly. Now, part of a really good American history course that I've been taking lately, I'm of course having to read a lot of writings, essays, and articles from the 17th and 18th century. Really enjoying that quite a bit. Now, a really interesting one came up a week ago, and it's called Earth's Holocaust by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, he wrote this in 1844, and I would like to give you a picture of the premise of this story. Now, the Earth had come to a point where everyone on Earth had arrived at such perfection that they decided that they would create a giant bonfire and burn up everything, all the old knowledge and all the old relics that were associated with that knowledge, because they considered it all rubbish and, of course, unneeded. Now, of course, the attitude that is used in this allegory in Hawthorne's story, Earth's Holocaust, it's not a new attitude at all. There has been debate over elitism, elite, educated individuals, government control versus freedom of the people. Well, it's been well articulated as far back as 380 years before Christ, namely in Plato's Republic. Well, again, these are not new concepts, but it's just interesting to get Hawthorne's fairly new take compared to, say, Plato's. Hawthorne's satirical examination of these concepts. So go ahead and listen to this excerpt to see what I mean.
It was now rumored among the spectators that all the weapons and munitions of war were to be thrown into the bonfire, with the exception of the world's stock of gunpowder, which, as the safest mode of disposing of it, had already been drowned in the sea. This intelligence seemed to awaken great diversity of opinion. The hopeful philanthropists esteemed it a token that the millennium was already come, while persons of another stamp in whose view mankind was a breed of bulldogs, professed that all the old stoutness, fervor, nobleness, generosity, and magnanimity of the race would disappear. These qualities, as they affirmed, requiring blood for their nourishment. They comforted themselves, however, in the belief that the proposed abolition of war was impracticable for any length of time together. Be that as it might, numberless great guns, whose thunder had long been the voice of battle, the artillery of the Armada, the battering trains of Marlborough, and the adverse cannon of Napoleon and Wellington, was trundled into the midst of the fire. By the continual addition of dry combustibles, it had now waxed so intense that neither brass nor iron could withstand it. It was wonderful to behold how these terrible instruments of slaughter melted away like playthings of wax. Then the armies of the earth wheeled around the mighty furnace, with their military music, playing triumphant marches, and flung in their muskets and swords. The standard-bearers, likewise, cast one look upward at their banners, all tattered with shot holes and inscribed with the names of victorious fields, and giving them a last flourish on the breeze, they lowered them into the flame, which snatched them upward in the rush towards the clouds. This ceremony being over, the world was left without a single weapon in its hands, except possibly a few old king's arms and rusty swords and other trophies of the Revolution in some of our state armories. And now the drums were beaten and the trumpets brayed all together as a prelude to the proclamation of a universal and eternal peace, and the announcement that glory was no longer to be won by blood, but that it would henceforth be the contention of the human race to work out the greatest mutual good, and that beneficence in the future annals of the earth would claim the praise of valor. The blessed tidings were accordingly promulgated and caused infinite rejoicings among those who had stood aghast at the horror and absurdity of war. But I saw a grim smile pass over the sacred visage of a stately old commander. By his war-worn figure and rich military dress, he might have been one of Napoleon's famous marshals, who with the rest of the world's soldiery had just flung away the sword that had been familiar to his right hand for half a century. Aye, aye, grumbled he, let them proclaim what they please, but in the end we will find that all this foolery has only made more work for the armorers and cannon founders. Why, sir, exclaimed I, in astonishment, do you imagine that the human race will ever so far return on the steps of its past madness as to wield another sword or cast another cannon? There will be no need, observed, with a sneer, one who neither felt benevolence nor had faith in it. When Cain wished to slay his brother, he was at no less for a weapon. We shall see, replied the veteran commander. If I am mistaken, so much the better, but in my opinion, without pretending to philosophize about the matter, the necessity of war lies far deeper than the honest gentlemen suppose. What? Is there a field for all the petty disputes of individuals? And shall there be no great law court for the settlement of national difficulties? The battlefield is the only court where such suits can be tried. You forget, General, rejoined I, that in this advantaged state of civilization, reason and philanthropy combined will constitute just such a tribunal as is requisite. Ah, I have forgotten that indeed, said the old warrior as he limped away. So as I was reading that story by Hawthorne for my class, it really occurred to me that there are a lot of people today that remind me of the same type of people in this story, where basically their arrived intellect could get rid of these weapons. And in the same spirit, that the people that have these similar attitudes and elite arrived intellect, that just by their intellect and their speaking and promoting that violence is bad, that they can get rid of violence. But, of course, we know that there will always be a continual percentage of humanity that won't ever fathom removing violence
and subjugation from their own moral code of problem solving. It will never occur to them. So, of course, evolution security is our attempt to help ourselves and help friends and our audience do better to protect themselves against these individuals that I just mentioned. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest for this week. His name is Ryan Mayfield, and he is a 14-year law enforcement veteran, which included 10 years on SWAT, and he was the lead defensive tactics and combatives instructor for his department. Now, he, of course, runs Kodiak Security Solutions, where he teaches lifesaving, stress inoculation, MMA with knives, sticks, and guns to thousands of students. But we believe his most important attribute is being a critical thinker and a forward-thinking defensive tactician. Please join us and keep the notepad close.
Hey, welcome to the show. We've got a special guest this week. We have Ryan Mayfield with Kodiak Security Solutions. Welcome to the show, Ryan, and thanks a lot for taking time out of your schedule to spend a little time with us.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and of course, I'm here with Eric and Aaron, as always. Say hi, guys.
How's it going, brother?
Hey, always glad to be here. Some of my best buds.
This is cool. We really enjoy when we get to do this stuff, and it's also extra special when we get to do it with a guest because we get to expand our experience and learn from people that do these things, in their profession, and there's always room to learn, and that's the one thing that we are huge about is learning. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of learning and what you do, Ryan, if you don't mind, if you would just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and a little bit of your background.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I grew up in Central California between Stockton and Modesto areas, and went to high school in Modesto, and then went off to college at Fresno State. Played a little baseball along the way, and after that, I went into while I was in college, I did some security work, quote unquote, on the door, doing a little bouncing, and that segued into law enforcement. There's obviously a lot more that goes into it, but that's what got me started on the LE side. And along the way, I picked up a family and a bunch of other good stuff. So in about 2001, I started a little training boutique, for lack of a better term, called Kodiak Security Solutions, which you mentioned. And I've just been doing what I refer to as small batch training sessions based around the ECQC paradigm and that kind of thing ever since. I retired in 2013 from the PD after I lost count after 6, but I think it was a total of 9 knee surgeries. And once they wouldn't let me play in the sandbox anymore, I moved on to greener pastures, but I kept the the Kodiak thing going along the way and continued to train when I can.
Very good, very good. And that's all good stuff to hear about, picking up the family and stuff, because it's nice to hear that, because you can do both of those things at the same time. It's not always easy, but
yeah, man. I mean, that's a tough balance, and I think a lot of guys, unfortunately, it's pretty easy balance to get wrong.
Sure.
But yeah.
So you mentioned briefly that you did some of the bouncer stuff and whatnot, and some of that led you into the LE element. But if you were to define that a little deeper, what really led you to your career in law enforcement?
I was always I think a lot of people fall into this category. I always looked up to police officers, and when I combined sort of that adoration with a very physical lifestyle. I was always an athlete, a lifelong martial artist, and a host of different disciplines. And I enjoy the intellectual side as well, which fits into the investigative route. And when I went to the academy in '99, I went there with the sole purpose, if I'm being candid, to be a SWAT guy. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on SWAT, and I wanted to be a part of that realm of law enforcement and the investigations that are a part of it. So it was all about chasing bad guys and aligning that with my intellectual interests as well as my physical pursuits. It's just kind of the perfect mix.
Well, that's a lofty goal to go in with, because that is in any agency that I've had involvement with or been friends with folks in. That's 1% that gets to SWAT. There's most departments don't have a very big SWAT team to begin with, and the departments that have a large SWAT team have a massive agency to back it. So that's cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys probably do go in with that goal. They just don't want to admit it, and I wouldn't have admitted it at the time either. But at the end of the day, I knew what I wanted, and it was just fortunately I was blessed to, timing is a lot of it, and so is being around people that are a lot better than you that are willing to help you along the way, and it worked out.
Well, if you look at your LE career as a whole, or maybe even in part, because there may have been a section that meant more than the rest, but is there anything that happened during your LE career that changed you or changed your way of thinking as it relates to training?
I think as it relates to training, I would say probably just how perishable your skills really are. And you don't really find that out for a while, I don't think. I think it takes some time to be enlightened, and it's usually not pleasant. Whatever it is you're doing or you think you're doing, it's probably not enough. And I'm talking about repetitions and ingraining that into your, that subconscious level of operation, because, man, and that was not to skip around the place too much, but that was the biggest revelation for me after I was laid up waiting for my medical paperwork to go through. And once I did retire, man, I couldn't believe how quickly stuff that I'd spent the last, 10, 14 years acquiring, how quickly it had left. It was crazy. Just like, simple stuff, things like, dope on my rifle and stuff like that if you're not staying up on it, it just vanishes. And we all know that, but I don't think we appreciate it until you're away from it for a while for whatever reason.
Nice. I got to just highlight that now, because that's going to be one of the things I look back on this interview, and that you just nailed something home for me, that just using the term perishable with your skills, that is so critical, because I agree. I've done plenty of competition shooting. I've done plenty of matches, and you walk away from any aspect of any of that, and of course there's tons of, this goes way deeper than that, but any of that stuff that you don't use it, you do lose it. And I really like applying the term perishable to that. That's cool.
Well, it's a fairly industry-wide term I think a lot of guys are familiar with, but I think as far as the intimacy of it, it was a nut check. I remember specifically, there's been several times where I thought, man, either I've got some, mental issues going on where I'm having a problem remembering stuff like cognitively, or it really is that perishable. And the answer is it really is. At least for me it was. I can't believe how quickly stuff goes away. And I think anybody that's been laid up for any length of time, there's a lot of military guys out there and SWAT guys, and the nature of our work is so detail specific, and you don't realize it. You get into the routine, and you just think, hey man, I'm good. Surely that stuff hasn't left the repertoire. And then lo and behold, when you zero in on it and you can't remember any of it, you think, man, I am lacking. So yeah.
Well, Ryan, Eric here. We're definitely going to hit a little harder on, the training aspect, and kind of ask you a few questions about your methodologies later in the discussion. You and I have not had the opportunity to meet, but we've interfaced with each other quite a bit on TPI, and for the audience, that's Total Protection Interactive Forums, which I believe was started by Craig Douglas and some of the guys in his fold at the time. Mm-hmm. which, TPI has brought some of in my opinion, some of the most brilliant minds in.
Amazing.
It's pretty awesome, the amount of filtered information, wisdom from all kinds of different areas. And it's, I would say that TPI is probably one of the biggest reasons I've had some of the most awesome relationships in training, and the instructors that I've been training under for many years essentially came out of TPI. So I guess my question for you is what got you onto that forum?
Man, I went, and by the way, I 100% agree with everything you just said. I went down some rabbit hole, I think off of SDF or what was the other, Warrior Talk, I think it was. And, well, I shouldn't say most, all of the other self-defense related forums at that time, at least from my perspective, were they were echo chambers about certain aspects of combatives that a lot of the war stories were either secondhand or they were coming from third generation students of a guy who did, and all this kind of stuff. And it was the first, I think TPI, when I finally found it, it was so refreshing because the guys that were on there were talking about stuff that was coming out of their lab currently. And I mean, you had guys on there, guys like Paul Sharp and of course Craig, and Mike and Lee and all those guys that were just, they were going out literally in the garage and banging the stuff out on a nightly basis, and then coming back and saying, well, I was wrong. That didn't work. I mean, you didn't see that at the time on the other forums. It was always, I do this and my stuff is the greatest. And TPI was like, man, if you came in with that attitude, you were going to be gone in 30 seconds. It wasn't going to be tolerated because the intellectual honesty was so high.
Well, and I agree with that. That was, one of the really good aspects of that is there is not a lot of, if I can use the term, forgive, douchebaggery on there. And again, you hit it on the head. If there's any BS on there, folks would call them out, and that just doesn't last on there. And
I think the other thing I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think the other thing that was really just valuable was that we all shared that same, for lack of a better term, that same delivery system where at least relatively early, everybody had kind of transitioned over to an MMA base, even if they didn't want to call it that. Like, guys were training with aliveness. And so what that meant was we could throw something out there that was an idea or a concept, and it wasn't just one training group or one gym that was going to go test that thing that night. It was going to be, all the T-Rexes on the board were going to be like, hey, I'm going to try that out tonight. And all of a sudden, all this data starts coming back. And it comes back really well articulated, which that was the other thing. There was I think it was incomparable. I still, to this day, think it's probably one of them. I mean, I would put some of TPI's discussion up there with pretty high-end forums in academia itself in terms of erudition and articulation. I mean, it was really second to none in that regard. And the ability to go out and send your stuff out, your ideas out to all these groups and have them test this with the same pressures and the same delivery systems that you're using was unheard of.
Well, I would term it peer-reviewed, would you not?
100%. That's the famous TPI term, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that essentially what you've been enunciating is that TPI really facilitated a lot of folks pressure testing. And I think that is the beauty of all those operating under TPI's, let's just put it that way, operating under that model. So I definitely believe that, through the pressure testing and everybody put into play on TPI is the reason we've got a lot of folks that have, to use your term, have become enlightened. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other side of that coin that it did was did a really good job of ego management because if you got on there and started acting like the fool or thinking your stuff didn't stink, it wasn't going to hang. So that makes for a nice environment.
Hey, Brian, again, there seems to be, at least from my perspective, a definitive drop in the use of forums for intellectual discussion, fielding of ideas. Do you believe that our defensive-minded society is losing out on anything because of that? Because it has been a very useful platform, and I feel like it's just kind of falling out of favor.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think it's kind of a symptom of the greater society in general. I just think we've gotten to such a clickbait level where, if you have to dig down more than 3 or 4 paragraphs, people are swiping on. It's, Instagram really isn't the best medium for that, obviously. I think it should probably be named Instagratification rather than gram, because it's just not, there's no way to really lay out any kind of arguments there. And if you try, you're going to be frustrated in the process. So I think it is lacking, and I don't think the modern technology that we're using on social media is helping that at all.
Well, Aaron, you've got a question for Ryan?
Sure, and I kind of wanted to follow up on that point. And it's, I don't want to name names, but there's definitely lots of real heavy hitters that have kind of moved on to social media. And I'll be honest, with my busy lifestyle, I probably fall into a little bit of laziness on that, and I do enjoy the interesting method of conversing with people all over the world, and people that I've known for decades. But it definitely does seem like the information has been culled down to something that's going to keep somebody's attention on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't know what the answer is for that, because we've kind of moved on to the point where everybody has structured their social media, and I would still lump forums into that in some regards. They've kind of structured their social media check-in routines around these instant snapshot formats, and I can't imagine. I mean, it's really going to take something special to get it back the way it used to be.
Just like anything else, I mean, it seems to be it's the audience that's asking for it, and
yeah, 100%.
And even these amazingly legit experts, unfortunately, they realize that they have to take part in that. And it's part of the promotion of their companies and their classes, and yeah, it's good and bad. I mean, I know that's pretty trite to say, but there's good things and bad things about it for sure. I have one question about your training regimen. Do you have a weekly regimen that you like to stick to, or do you periodize? What does your personal training look like these days? It
looks like trying to fit something in between playing Uber driver for my kids. That's what it looks like. So I've got 3 kids going in 50 different directions each. And so as a result, I end up, trying to cram a lot of stuff into the weekends these days, provided they don't have some kind of tournament or something. So I do shoot regularly. I try to challenge myself with, random quals. I did that, the RE Factor kill card challenge a while back, just stuff to try and get my adrenaline up a little bit and see if I can still perform, and then just work some just really fundamental stuff. There's nothing too whiz bang. I try to roll every 6 months, usually during the winter, because of my knees. To be honest with you, going to jits 3 days a week, I can't do it anymore. But I try to at least rotate back out onto the mats every few months. Again, back to that whole perishable skills thing. And then I try to train with the boys. I've got, one of my boys is a monster. He's 6'5", and the other one is coming up. And so we can get some pretty good little sessions in when we want. And that's nice too. So that's kind of where it's at. And then PT wise, I think nowadays it's more like if I can drop and do a few burpees and push-ups and then get back on it. I know none of this is sexy, but it's more about fitting it in when you can and just trying to keep the joints lubed,
Well, I can't agree more, Ryan. Sometimes that is what it takes, is just simply finding what you can do. Sometimes my workouts are 10 minutes,
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm lucky that I have had a schedule where I can maintain, a decent JIT schedule. On our show here, we espouse drills each week, and so pretty much we've been trying to hit those drills up each week, and our workouts during the week, but sometimes it certainly is tough. But something, speaking of training, something you said when you and I were talking earlier today really stood out to me, and I'd like you to kind of hit on it, which I believe the term or terminology you used was dealing with the chaos. So can you kind of expound on that for us?
Sure. Yeah. The general concept is we were talking, I think you and I were talking about where is the kind of the training community headed. And there's so many guys hanging a shingle out now, and so many of them fall within the realm of the TPI paradigm, if you will. We're kind of getting back to a Paul Sharp, Matt Thornton term. We've reached our breadth, and now we're starting to get back to the depth thing, and so one of the overarching things that I saw over the years in all the violent encounters I was involved in, there's a distinct difference between the frenetic chaos of a real world incident, and specifically I'm talking about at contact distance, and that of even the most well put together training scenario. And I think we all inherently know that, or instinctively know that, excuse me. But I think that there's levels and layers to that in terms of where we're headed in the future, I think that there needs to be, I always use the analogy that it's like using, and I think I wrote this on TPI at one point, that when you try to describe what actual combative energy at that range is like to a nascent trainer, to somebody who's just coming in and wants to get on the mats, I always tell them it's like, imagine you've been doused in gasoline and you're wearing a straitjacket and you've got to get that jacket off after somebody's lit you on fire. The pace at which you struggle and freak the frick out to get out of that thing, that's the kind of energy you're going to be dealing with while somebody's trying to kill you. And that usually drives the point home, where it's like, okay, yeah, I can imagine what that would be like, and everything is amped up at 150 miles an hour, and it's just your what you think goes out the window. And when you combine that element with decision making, I think you have the future of high-end training. And that's a loaded statement, but what I mean by that is you've got to create, and you can do this a few different ways, but you've got to create a training modality that allows for guys to make a very few decisions in a very short time span on automatic. And that looks a lot like Craig's material when he's, he talks about during muck, for those of you that don't know what that is, managing unknown contacts, pushing play on the tape so that cognitively you're not thinking. Your focus is on what's going on around you, and the verbal dialogue that's coming out of your mouth is not based on incoming stimulus from the bad guy. You're on autopilot at that point. Your dialogue is pre-recorded and it's coming out on its own. When you're making decisions about reacting to a threat under that straitjacket on fire pressure, there has to be very few decisions you have to make, and they need to be very, very quickly rotated through. And a good example of what I'm talking about, because I know this is it's tough to do on a podcast and it's kind of abstract, but if you look, are you guys familiar with the ISR matrix?
No, educate us, buddy.
Okay, so the ISR, actually Paul Sharp and Lou Gutierrez started it years ago, back in the early 2000s. And it's an MMA-based combatives system, both civilian and law enforcement and military. But one of the premises of that system is it's rooted in one position called the underhook and pike, and there's a lot more to the ISR. But underhook and pike is essentially an underhook on one side, and your hand is piked into the side of the guy's jaw ear line with the other, and it's a stabilization position. From that position, you essentially have three options based on his energy. You can stuff the head, pull him to the ground. He can posture, you can reap the leg, or he can headlock you where you shuck the arm and take his back. Okay, great. Those three things are drilled over and over and over, and they call it mapping. And it can be done up to a very frenetic pace, but because your responses are limited and his energy is limited because of the position you put him in, it makes navigation of that chaos much, much easier. I don't know if any of this is making sense to you right now, so I'm going to stop and let you guys ask questions for clarification.
Well, actually, what I'll state about that, going to Paul Sharp, Paul Sharp's been a contributor to myself and my folks around me, my training partners, for many, many years. But I just recently got the chance to train with Paul. And interesting that you bring up that methodology, because that's precisely what he used. I don't recall him terming it that at the time, but we were doing a lot of essentially knife defense and gun defense based upon a basic 2-on-1 Russian tie. And we only had 3 responses through each portion of that training. It was life-changing material, just like ECQC under Craig is life-changing. I really, really got a lot out of that. So it does make sense to me.
Yeah, it's a very... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that to me, it reminds me of Colonel Boyd's OODA loop. A lot of people, we've kind of taken the OODA loop and, applied it to, normal decision-making in violent encounters. But what it really was all about, as far as I understand, was that he had basically 4 decisions that fighter pilots could choose from. And within that OODA loop, they would make those decisions. They would observe, orient, decide, and act, I guess. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. But it would be simply a decision of one of 4 particular moves or flight patterns or whatever. And so it sounds like a very similar thing, right?
It is. And it's, again, obviously the more decisions you have, the more choices you have, the more difficult it's going to be. But there's added layers that have to come into play too. For example, the environment, that you're operating in. Everybody for the most part is training on a mat or in a training hall somewhere. And I was telling my last class, I said the last fight I got in on duty, the guy was standing on top of a car and I was on the ground and I had to get him. I was fighting him between those 2 levels. Like, how do you know what I mean? Like those kinds of layers of complexity are really difficult because they're infinite. So at the end of the day, it comes down to seeking out one of those control positions or what I call a control station from which to operate. Another example, so underhook and pike would be one. Another example would be the harness position on the back or over under, however you want to, seatbelt, however you want to term it. Another example would be, if you're in guard, getting a good lockdown position from guard. Those are all things that minimize the damage you're sustaining while serving as a launch pad for a very, very limited number of techniques that you're going to move to regain the initiative. And it's not just grappling. I mean, it's, again, I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this thinking, well, duh, but it's not. When I talk about the training community shifting gears, I think where it's going to, those same principles that we've been working on in systems like the ISR and others are going to translate over into the firearms side of things. And I'll give you a good example, and that's malfunction clearances or failure to fire at 5 yards, 7 yards, 10 yards, right? If you go out on the range right now, even in a combative handgun class, you will see a ton of guys doing a TRB or tap rack, or even a transition. If they're on the long gun, they're going to sling that rifle and they're going to transition to pistol. And what they should be doing is closing the gap and getting a control position. It makes no sense to do a transition at 3 yards. and yet you still see it. And guys will sit there and say, well, yeah, because we're just trying to get the reps in for the transitions. But you're putting in so many training scars at that point. One of the drills that we worked fairly consistently and got great results out of was bagging the guy's head for that particular scenario, or just having him close his eyes, spin him around, and then we'd either drop him off at the 15, the 10, or the 3, and have him open his eyes and give him a threat command. And he had to decide whether he was going to transition, and he was on the long gun, whether he was going to transition, whether he was going to close the gap, go to blades, go to clinch, whatever it was, based on where he was at relative to threat proximity-wise when he opened his eyes. That kind of stuff, to me, is the future of, designing those kind of decision drills that lead to a control position at the termination of it. Whatever decision you make, you better have a control point at the end of that, whether that's grabbing a solid piece of cover or getting an underhook. There needs to be a control point, not just some random mechanical thing going on in between.
No, I like what you're mentioning there too about training scars. That's because when you do these drills, like they're like exactly what you're talking about, when they're presented with that situation, you've done that 1,000 times in your sleep, you're more likely to make that move in that position, and that's the wrong move. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And we talk to people all the time that are like, well, I'm fine, I carry a gun. I'm like, well, what if I attacked you from here? You're having a conversation with them, and it's like, you're not going to pull that gun on me from here. Good luck. Right. And that's, fortunately, I feel confident in that with a little bit of training. But even with a guy with no training, if he's fast, if he sees what you're doing, you're not going to make that into a position where you're going to be able to discharge it. And there's a possibility you could, if you've had the proper training, some of the stuff Craig does, and I'm sure you work with as well, where the really close draw, pectoral index kind of stuff, where if you've done that stuff and you learn to collect your pistol properly, you're going to have a higher chance in close situations if that's the choice to make. But we talked about that, in ECQC too, where there's been some situations. He described a specific situation where an officer shot himself in the arm because he didn't train collecting his pistol properly. Mm-hmm. He did not train keeping his offhand in a safe position while firing at short range, and he swung into the line of the attacker and shot himself instead of the attacker. Now, fortunately, that guy lived, but he's permanently wounded. So that's right. Those are the type of training scars can become real scars.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think as guys move more towards that model of because, God, man, how many freaking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt cops can you have out there? I mean, not enough is the answer, but I mean, right now, relative to when we started back in the golden age of TPI, I mean, nobody had their black belt. It was just there weren't, and now they're freaking everywhere. And instructors are hanging out shingles right and left that are seasoned SWAT guys, seasoned SEALs, all these guys, BJJ black belts, running MMA gyms, and so they get it. They get that MMA and JITS is the answer to those control points. Where they're going now, I hope, is going to be more onto those decision sides. The tough thing is it's more of an advanced skill because you have to have the other stuff down first, and I get that. But in terms of high-end training packages, I think that's where it's at.
No, I definitely agree with you. There's so much more to learn in that close stuff than running through a course. And 3 guns fun. You're not learning anything about truly defending yourself doing that, though. And that's where we see a lot of people moving. That or 3-gun and PRS are the 2 fastest growing shooting sports, but that's not what is going to actually train people to defend themselves, and that's what we're trying to stay focused on. But that's where a lot of our clients and people in the community come from, though. So it's hard to break some of those habits.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm going to just put this out there right now. It's not really related to this on too much of a level, but I wish guys would start paying attention to how they're holstering their pistols.
Oh God, yes.
You're talking about this 3-gun stuff and everything. I mean, guys I respect, guys that I know personally, TPI guys I've even seen do this. You're holstering almost as fast as you're drawing from concealment at appendix. And I'm like, man, first of all, the old notion, and it's still out there, but one of the key things I teach in my fundamentals class is look at your holster. Slow down and look at your holster. If you're putting your gun back in your holster, there's no hurry. Like, he's not going to come back to life. So otherwise the gun's going to be out. So take a peek, slow down, and holster safely. And yet I see guys online all the time, on Instagram, on video, doing their draw strokes, and they're just shoving that thing back in there, keeping their eyes downrange at the target. And I'm like, man, something catastrophic is going to happen. And I hope it doesn't happen to one of these guys that I know. But in fact, I had a guy the other day, it's a very big internet personality, and he ran a smoking hot run with transitions from rifle to pistol. And I sent him a little message, and I said, man, that was super fast, very cool. Please slow down your reholster, because he shoved that thing in so fast, I was waiting for the bang. Didn't go off, and his response was, well, if I know my holster line and I know where my condition of my pistol, there's no danger. And he just shut me off. And again, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about as far as discourse and intellectual honesty, all that kind of stuff going on the Instagram. It's a poor format. They instantly get defensive because they're trying to market their product, and they're not open. I hope he heard me, but he certainly didn't encourage any of his readers or watchers to follow suit. So,
yeah, no, and I wish I could say the only guy I know that shot himself, but the most recent guy I know that has shot himself was reholstering, and this was at a PPC match. And if you're familiar, I know you are, but anybody out there that's not familiar with PPC, this is shooting from a stationary position at a stationary target. There is no rush. There's no timer. You have an expiration timer for your shots. The timer doesn't count how fast your gun's back in the holster. And that's true of anybody listening for any of these competitive sports. No one times how fast your pistol goes back in the holster. So that's not part of the series. So anyway, we'll move on from that, because that's something we could talk about for a long time, and definitely something we will delve into later about safe handling, because there is definitely something that needs to be covered and addressed and readdressed for sure. Because you can sit there and do that all in the mirror all day long with a blue gun, and you do it with a hot gun, you might have a very different end result that you don't want. So anyway, we'll bring this around to a different thought, more back into the intellectual part. What are your thoughts on being a voracious reader as it relates to your walk of life?
I'll be honest with you. When I was younger, I didn't think much of it. And when I say younger, I mean up almost to my 20s. I didn't get it, and I wish I had. I really do. And a lot of that's obviously in how you're raised. But at the end of the day, the way I look at it now is reading essentially equals communication. If you read, you'll have vocab, you'll understand, sentence structure, and then you'll eventually become articulate because of it. And I think the trend away from that is tragic. I mean, people can't even. I work at a pretty professional organization now, and people can't draft an email to save their ass. It's really all about increasing your, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy a good story too, but at the end of the day, reading is about grasping big concepts and broadening your lexicon, period. And that's what I tell my kids now. Listen, I know you don't want to read, but at the end of the day, you're going to, because it's going to expand your vocabulary, period. But I fear it's a dying art, and I fall victim to this sometimes too. I feel like a lot more people are listening to books nowadays than they are actually reading them, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not, until you've developed a very broad vocabulary, it's not a good idea, because really the expansiveness is going to come, in my opinion, is going to come from underlining those words, adding it to a vocabulary list to study later. Now, if you're stopping every time a word comes up you don't know on that audio book, fine. But I don't know that people do that regularly.
Well, and like you say, you're listening to it, you're not reading it. So even if you don't understand the word, you're less likely to be exposed to it in a fashion, the way it's spelled, the way it's pronounced versus how it's spelled, all of that. That's definitely... Yeah,
that's maddening when somebody says something in a really cool turn of phrase in French or something like that, and you're listening to it, it's like, crap, I have no way, I don't even know how to spell that.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I admit I struggle with reading.
and finding the time to do it. And I'd be more likely to watch a story in a movie, but when I read, I'd be more likely to read a technical manual about how an M2 Browning works. That's
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, I'm looking for knowledge, not necessarily, a good a good tale. So, on that, what are you currently reading?
So I was really fortunate to come across have you guys ever heard of the 5-foot shelf or the Harvard Classics?
Oh boy, you've alienated us again. Bring us into the fold. Bring us in.
Okay, so and I'm going to butcher the exact thing on this, but back in the early 20th century, the president of Harvard decided that he wanted to have a collection from the Western canon that would, if a person wanted to get a really good grasp of the Western canon, of the classics, how much would they have to read, which books would they have to own, etc. So he ended up, and they call it the Harvard Classics to this day. You can still find them on eBay. They're about $300, I think. It's like 52 volumes of all of the classics from, Plato, Chaucer, Shakespeare, all the way up to Twain and everybody else. And the idea being that if you read 15 minutes a day from this set, within a year, you'll be able to finish all of the volumes. So anyway, that's the story behind the 5-foot shelf or the Harvard Classics. But to answer your question, what I'm reading right now out of that is Areopagitica by Milton, which is basically a verbal plea to Parliament to not censor or burn books. Very, very interesting. Obviously it's Milton, so his prose is great, very articulate. But yeah, that's one I'm reading. I'm horrible. I'm kind of a slut when it comes to reading. I don't really commit to anything. Matthew Walker's Why I Sleep, which is all about. Why We Sleep, which is all about sleep. And then just for fun, Jack Carr's True Believer, which is the second installment. I think the first one was The Terminal List or something like that. So those are the three that I'm currently cycling through. Do you guys do that, or is it just me? I can't stick with one book. I kind of bounce around.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got like 5 books next to my spot on the couch.
That makes me feel better.
And that True Believer's on my short list. It's not in my hand yet, but
Did you read the first one?
No, I have not.
Yeah, you probably should.
Okay. I'll do it in order.
Yeah,
Somebody talked to me about True Believer, and it made me really like it. It kind of gripped me a little bit. So,
dude, it's the least frustrating operator book I've read to date. I've loved it. I've enjoyed both of them for obvious reasons because he knows what the hell he's talking about.
Right.
But yeah, it's a fun book.
No, that's good stuff. And there's just there's something magic about turning pages and touching paper, because even reading on an iPad or a Kindle, that's great. And it works for some people. I need to hold a book or it doesn't work for me. So anyway, Aaron, did you want to take this in a different direction again?
Sure. Well, the good thing is I think we've kind of taken this in a different direction already, which I'm really glad about. I'll say this, Ryan. One of the things that we are trying to do is kind of get outside of just these martial arts topics. There's all these great instructors. We could all name about 15 of them right now. And they're on, the usual shows. We've had some of these guests and we'll have some of these guests, but you often hear some of the same stories. And that's great, but I think it'd be better to learn more about what these guys or these gals do besides all this stuff, because that interests me and it interests the rest of us on the show here. So outside of martial arts and shooting, what does the regular Ryan Mayfield enjoy to do, on your free time?
Oh boy. Man, I don't think it's any one thing. I'm not like an avid golf, although I do like to golf, which is going to send some of the guys over the edge. But I do like to golf. But I don't think it's any one. Is the Renaissance ideal a pastime? Is that a thing? Like I know that sounds cheesy, but
no, that's wonderful.
That's just it. I don't feel like if I feel like I'm lacking in one area, then I'll hit that thing, whether it's physical or intellectual or artistic, or we went on a kick a while back where my wife and I did like a 5-pack of San Francisco opera sessions, like somewhere LeBlanc is falling over dead. But stuff like that, just kind of broadening perspective and trying to do things that are a little bit, I don't know. I think, and you guys maybe can relate to this, but I feel like when we spend a really large amount of time doing any one thing, and in this case I'm talking about the combative world, I really feel like you've got to interject some balance in there. And I don't think enough guys do that, man. I look at some of these guys, I know guys, but I also look at some of these guys that are out there that are just every day, man, they're burning 1,000 rounds, and they're going to the gym, and they're doing all, and that's freaking awesome. I love that, especially for guys that are at the tip and actually going after the bad guys today. I get it. But there's so many dudes that I feel like are missing out on that balance, that guys all the way back to Musashi and all the great warriors have talked about. If you don't have that, you're going to burn up. You're going to burn out. And I don't know. I really think that if you're listening to this, obviously you're geared towards a combative mindset. But man, don't forget that other stuff too. Play some piano or guitar or something, and don't just pigeon your whole. I remember Craig saying when he retired, he's like, I went to town today and I didn't even take a pistol. And it was, it's Craig Douglas. Like most people would think that's, there's no way. Yeah. Because I've carried one for the last 25 freaking years. I really don't want to do it today, and God forbid you put that out there. And he's probably going to call me later and tell me I shouldn't have said that, but it stuck with me. I was like, yeah. And then sure enough, when I retired, you've got to find balance. Yeah. There were plenty of times when I retired that I left the house without a gun, and never left without a knife, because I've been taught from the time I was little on the ranch that you never just walk out the door without a knife. There's too much stuff that can go wrong. But, and I would encourage you to do that too. I think guys should occasionally branch out, lay back a little bit, and just see what it feels like to not be lugging around all that weight. I'm not saying go unarmed. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's worth looking at.
That sounds good. Now, I keyed in on one thing you stated. You said that you and your wife went on kind of an opera binge. You said in San Francisco, right? Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, yeah, that's something that sounds great to me. I haven't been to an opera in a while, but one fun kind of thing is that several years ago when I was still in college, I got a little bull terrier female that was just this great little puppy, and we were driving home from where we got her out of state, and I couldn't think of what to name her. And then all of a sudden I thought, opera, there's the recitative, and then there's the aria. The aria is the beautiful, elaborate portion of the dialogues. The recitative is more of the dialogue, but yeah. So I named her aria after that section in the opera. So that's pretty nice. Cool. I have some ideas reading through some of your details here, but one of my favorite questions, because I am actually a musician too. That's what I did, in my 20s, and until I decided I didn't want to make a living doing it.
You got out early.
Yeah, I did, and although I still do play professionally, it's actually more fun now that I don't have to try and make a living with it. Actually, I usually play guitar up until they tell me to turn the red light on here. Just for fun too, you'll hear the bumper music on the podcast, and I put that stuff together here on my garage band here. Yeah. So then the question is, so what are your top 5 musicians, bands, or I'm going to guess this, or possible composers?
Yeah. God, 5. Like, how do you do that, man? How do you go down to 5? Right. That's all right. I think
Name more than 5 if you want, buddy.
Definitely Chopin.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody cares, Arthur Rubinstein's got some fantastic stuff. Check out Opus 55, number 1 in F minor. That's amazing. Bach. And then if I'm trying to at least broaden things out a little bit, Miles Davis, kind of blue.
Yeah.
Particularly blue and green. Sinatra, Come Fly With Me is a perennial favorite. AC/DC, Back in Black. And, man, this last one's going to trip people out, but Birdie, Skinny Love. That's probably one that half the people out there don't even know about, but I don't know, man. There's something about a woman's voice singing after a long day that puts me into a Zen state. So between those, I guess that's probably enough.
And that's great. So first off, just kind of making notes here. So Miles Davis, kind of blue, is certainly the preeminent jazz record. It's what really kind of solidified, there was earlier jazz, but I mean, it just is incredible. If you ask anybody if you ask someone that's a jazz listener or player, okay, I'm trying to get into jazz, and they'll go, okay, get Kind of Blue.
Yep. I tell guys that all the time.
Yeah, it's the starting point. Yeah, it's a great album. I played lots of tunes off of that record in solo gigs and in ensembles. I'm just showing a little leg here on my little bit of musical education in college. So, I mean, Chopin was from the Romantic period, right?
Yeah.
Then circling back to Bach, the thing that I loved about the Baroque period was the harpsichord.
Yeah.
What was fun was in one of my music courses in college, they happened to have a harpsichord.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and I'd never played one, even though I was actually this accountant that was kind of minoring in music and literature. That's the way I tried to do it, but I kind of got in good with the instructor and said, hey, can I go in there and play that harpsichord a little bit? And so
how old was it?
I don't know. To be honest, I think it was a contemporary one.
Oh, okay.
Which would have been really cool if it was, one from a couple hundred years ago. But yeah, it was neat. But it was really wild. So I think you play piano. It sounds like you were saying.
I've dabbled with piano. I play guitar.
Oh, cool.
I would never say that I play piano.
The interesting thing, right, about harpsichord is that it's essentially a guitar played with keys, right? But the funny thing was there's no dynamics. It was no matter how hard you hit the key, one sound, one volume. But no, it was really neat. I'm not much of a keyboard player myself, but I can dabble in some chords and at least make some sounds. And man, great choices on music. I love everything you mentioned.
That's a fun question.
Yeah.
Well, we have really enjoyed everything you've shared with us so far, and this has been a great interview and that's a great way to spend an evening, whether we recorded it or not, I'll tell you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's fun. I don't know if I'm supposed to ask you guys more questions or how that works, but
if there's stuff you want to know, knock yourself out.
I'm not much of a one-way conversationalist. Yeah. I like to hear about other people's.
Yeah, no, it is. Normally when you have
ask questions about
when you have a conversation, you get both sides, and we're just pounding you back into the corner, right?
No, it's fine. I just don't want to be a conversational narcissist and sit over here and hog the mic. That's all.
Oh no, and this is kind of how we normally run this, so it's all good. Right. That's normal because we are here to beat up on you tonight. But
all right, very good.
Yeah, no, we merely wish to be in the realm that you're in, and at some point with our training, business, and that's we really model ourselves after Craig and guys like yourself that are pressure testing and teaching in the same method, because we just firmly believe that you can go shoot drills all day long, or you can roll around in the dirt with an AR, and all that stuff's fun. But if you don't apply it in the right way, all you're doing is killing time. You're not actually training in a way that's going to actually help you in a life or death situation. So that's one of the reasons that we actually sought you out because of your beliefs and your modality. So that's very cool. So coming up on the hour, so we're probably going to wrap it up. But in closing, is there just like, if there was something you were going to tell someone that is basically kind of, as we to borrow the term, putting themselves on the path and choosing to train in this direction, is there something that you would tell them as it relates to the training defender lifestyle that would be like a key thing, like this is what you need to do?
Number one, be humble. I think hubris is kissing cousin, narcissism. It's only, it's repellent, but it also really stifles your evolution, because it's going to close your mind, and people are not going to want to open up to you about stuff that's going to help you out. So stay humble. And I think guys that have been through a few ECQCs or that roll on a regular basis, they get the hubris knocked out of them in a hurry, right? But there's still a lot of it out there, especially in this community. Chris calls them swinging dicks, and they are. There's some guys that just cannot get past their own ego. So seek out guys that are really humble. And number two, I would say, pursue everything, right? Like look for you'd be amazed at how many little things you'll pick up watching some of the most obscure, dumbass YouTube videos about combatives and stuff like that. If nothing else, some of these people have tremendous imaginations, and they may put a scenario out there you haven't thought of before. So don't think that, if you got nothing to do and you're just killing time, man, jump onto YouTube and watch videos and look at positions that people put themselves in and see if you maybe hadn't thought about some of that stuff. There's so many little details to be found that it's crazy. And the last thing I'll say is if you can, seek out, again, this is going to sound really jaded, but find as many seasoned patrol guys, law enforcement patrol guys, that are also DT guys as you can. Guys like, I know, obviously Paul Sharp and Chris and those guys. But the guys that have spent a lot of time on the streets, who are also training on a regular basis, I have a little different perspective on things. And I'm not saying that you should go to cops over military or anything like that. That's not the point. But there's a grittiness there, and there's a little bit of perspective that they have that a lot of guys don't. And that comes from regularly having to do all the stuff that we talk about on a normal basis under conditions that are just freaking weird, in environments that are odd and unforgiving. And then they're also doing it on a regular basis. So they're getting to see that adrenal effect, that chaos management component on a regular basis. Guys that are training, even if you're training 3, 4, 5 times a week, which if you're doing it at that pace, you're going to get hurt eventually because you're just going balls to the walls. But if you're doing, a couple ECQCs a year and you're training on a regular basis, you're going to get a confidence level where you think you can handle just about any energy. There's another notch above that. And most of those kind of patrol types that I'm talking about, they see that notch on a regular basis, and they can really help you out. If nothing else, perspective-wise, hit them up, ask them, hey, I know you train JITS, I know you train MMA. What do you think are some things that I can infuse into my training that I'm not accounted for right now? And listen.
Well, brother, those are superb recommendations in closing. One of the things that I'll add is that you are most certainly Chris LeBlanc's twin from another mother. I definitely see you guys are very, very much alike. Chris is a good friend of mine, and he's a brilliant guy, and you guys are certainly of the same cloth. So thanks a lot.
Chris is a hero of mine. He's a good dude.
Well, lastly, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, I don't know if you have any kind of public interface that you would want to recommend.
I really don't. I don't have a website or anything like that. As far as training goes, I am doing a seminar later this month locally here at my MMA gym, but I don't have a website or anything. So if you're interested, if you want to chat with me or whatever, just best way is just to email me, Kodiak5@att.net.
There you go. Well, that certainly is something I'll hit on in closing as well. We definitely want to have you up here at some point with Brian and I, and see if we can get Aaron in. Or we also have the option of Oklahoma as well, where Aaron is. So I just want to go ahead and close out here. It's been an excellent ride with you tonight, and I would certainly like to invite you back another time, and maybe we can focus on more of a two-way conversation. I think that's something you seem to want to do, so that's what we'll do next time, is we'll just have a more of a two-way conversation, if that sounds all right.
That'd be fantastic, man. And I just want to say thank you guys very much for having me on. You've been consummate professionals, and I think you're onto something here, man. Keep it up.
Well, thank you very much. Well, listen, we'll go ahead and say goodbye for now. You have a blessed evening.
You too, brother. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, I'll tell you what, that was a fascinating interview. I had never heard from Ryan Mayfield before, and I'll tell you what, I was really surprised by what he had to offer. Again, since I hadn't heard from him on any other show, I mean, I was just blown away with his expertise, his deeper knowledge, and of course, I loved hearing about his interest in music and other things outside of the martial life. So we look forward to having him back again, because it was so much fun, and we'll have, like they talked about at the end there, more of a dialogue between us and him. Well, so this brings us to our accountability for the week. I continue to transcribe my notes from ECQC, which of course was a couple of weeks ago, but I've just got a lot of notes that I really wanted to solidify my knowledge on those. And I did make it to jiu-jitsu just once this week, but I'll tell you what, it was a great time getting in there with my wife. I am really blessed to have her as a partner, and often I'll be honest, I don't like to go to jiu-jitsu sometimes without her, because for one thing, she's a better practitioner than I am, and she helps me a ton. And I just have to give kudos to her, because I'll tell you what, if anyone has an excuse not to go work out and not to do jiu-jitsu, it's her. She has some significant back pain and some significant hip pain that, honestly, her chiropractor has said that it's extremely bad and that she shouldn't be doing what she's doing, but she still gets out there and gets after it. So, again, a shout out to my wonderful wife, and as a wonderful partner in jiu-jitsu. Thanks for helping me. So in addition to that, I took some time on Gracie University, which, if you're not aware of that, you really should look that up. Even if you don't go to a Gracie school, you can pay a fee to get into the Gracie University, where you can see videos and instruction. I'll tell you what, it is a major supplemental to my jiu-jitsu path. I would say it's akin to dry firing, and maybe even a little bit more, because it's just a great tool to help you remember jiu-jitsu techniques, because I'll tell you what, there are lots of steps to some of these more complicated techniques, so just really good to be able to do that. So for exercise this week, besides jiu-jitsu, I'll tell you, I've been pretty low impact with just a handful of walks with my wife around the neighborhood, but that's still a pretty good bit of exercise that I get my heart rate up pretty well, because we've got some hills around here. So then on to dry fire for the week. I believe that I did not miss any days. I definitely try to dry fire every day, even if it is just my 5 to 10 draws in the morning. Once I put my clothes on in the morning after I get out of the shower, I will put my holster on. I will take my carry gun out and then put my blue gun in my appendix holster, and I will do 5 to 10 draws, perfect draws, and then I'll go about as fast as I can, again, just to get that base level skill ready for the day. Now, lastly, I'll try and get through this pretty quick, guys. I'm kind of taking too much time, I think, here. But lastly, I took another private lesson with, the great coach Mike Brown that I'm blessed to have here in town. I just have to say, if you need a coach, or if you're in the Oklahoma area or close to it, you really need to seek Mike Brown out. He is an excellent coach. I have gotten the best firearms training of my life from him. I just have to say, and it's changed the way I think about spending my training dollars. Real quick, I started out right as we were starting to get the lesson going. I asked him about, my trigger pull technique. I'd learned this kind of inchworm technique on my trigger, and boy, he stopped me real quick. He said, "Don't even think about the trigger. Here's what you need to think about. You need to grip the heck out of your gun. That is number one, the number one focus. Then your front sight, really seeing that front sight all the way through the string of fire and basically nothing else. And then the trigger comes after that. Now, with that heavy, heavy grip, the trigger almost doesn't matter when you're speaking in combat shooting. And another thing that was really apparent is that I need more consistency as I get my hand on the gun to draw. I definitely was not consistent enough in how I grabbed that pistol and put my hand into place on there for a good handle on it. Also, even though we don't realize it, we actually look at the target to see if we made our hits. It's a subconscious thing, but Mike taught me to not do that, to simply get the string of fire done, and then you can look at the target. But get all the shots on, because every shot is gone. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the next shot. And then we did a really good and brilliant shot calling drill that I won't give any secrets away, but it was pretty amazing. So again, great training from Mike, and again, seek him out on Facebook if you don't know him already. Guys, I'm sorry I'm taking so long. Let's get this drill of the month out, my accountability on that. This was the drill that we called the 5-6-7, which was 5 yards, 6 shots within 7 seconds. I like to do 3 iterations on that and kind of have an average of how I did, and I do this cold usually, at least I try to. My first time it was a score of 56 in 3.39 seconds, and then I had a score of 59, and for some reason did not get my timing on that. Then on the third time, I got a 60 score in 4.33 seconds. Again, that was on a B8 target, 5 yards, 6 shots in 7 seconds. So guys, that brings me to the end of my lengthy accountability. Hey, Brian, what do you have going on? What did you have going on this week, buddy?
Hey, thanks, Aaron. I always appreciate your perspective on the accountability portion. And I feel like I might be low guy on the totem pole this week, because I'm going to start off with what I didn't do. And man, I did not get to jiu-jitsu once, and I did not shoot this week. And that is not the typical week that I want to have. I did supplement, got a little extra CrossFit in, so I had plenty of cardio and a weightlifting session, but to not do what I normally do in a week. And it's frustrating when my schedule doesn't line up to allow me to do that. And it is one of the things I got to realize, that I'm not always going to be able to do it. So, I'm beating myself up over this, but I still did a lot of work. And one of the cool things on the CrossFit end is now I've got a friend that started going to the early morning classes that I typically do along with me. And that's actually giving me a little additional accountability for making those morning classes versus trying to fit it in elsewhere. And I got to tell you, that is really, for me, the best time of the day to get that heavy work done and get the blood flowing, get woke up and get on with my day. And I've got that stuff done by, 6:30 in the morning, and I've still got time to eat and take a shower before I even go to work. So there is time to do this in a day for those of you that think that there isn't. So bear that in mind. But did get a little bit of dry firing in, but for me, that's about it for the week. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Eric.
Thanks a lot, Brian. That's some good accountability. So as far as dry fire, I dry fired 4 times. I've been focusing on changing my grip to more of a counter torsion method. I know that Aaron and our good buddy Matt Salyer have been working with Mike Brown, who, of course, Mike has been on our show and a huge influence on us. Shout out to him as well. So shooting-wise, I did the 5-6-7 drill that we prescribed, which is essentially kind of a focused drill. It's a slower bill drill. So I got that accomplished. Also, this week I switched out my sights on my primary pistol to Dawson Precision with a .105 front sight and a .135 rear. As we age and the vision gets more challenging, I tell you that thinner front sight is really, I think, going to help me out quite a bit. A little less eye confusion. So looking forward to using those this weekend in IDPA. So I'll report back to you guys when I do that. So as far as jiu-jitsu, didn't get to jiu-jitsu this week because of the heavy recording schedule. We had several guests this last week, and then I had a work trip. So unfortunately didn't get to make it, but we'll make some of that up this week. So workout-wise, that's kind of been where my focus has been anyway. So I've been focusing on my strength and conditioning after my back has been feeling a lot better. So not at all a personal record, but, I had 3 workouts this week, and I did one set of, or actually my ending set of squats at 2.25 times 10. So again, not a personal record, but after this year or more of dealing with this injury, that's actually getting in the right direction. So that was pretty encouraging. So moving on to the drill of the week, we are going to prescribe the Todd Green FAST drill, that stands for Fundamentals, Accuracy, and Speed Test, off of pistol-training.com. The drill is done at 7 yards from concealment using a IDPA target with a 3x5 card stapled or taped to the head. You have 2 rounds loaded into your magazine that's loaded into the weapon, and you have at least 4 rounds in your spare magazine in your mag pouch. So from the buzzer, you'll draw and fire 2 rounds to the head 3x5 card, slide lock reload, and 4 rounds into the body or the 8-inch circle. That simple. Now, this week we're going to simply have no par time. We're going to aim for perfect accuracy, because essentially the drill is done with perfect accuracy to count, but we're going to kind of ease into it like we normally do. And we'll add time constraints to it the following week. So that's it for the drill. Let's go ahead and get out there and get that done, and we'll talk about it our following show. So I think that does it for tonight. It's been a great evening. I really enjoy this time I have with Aaron and Brian. And so until next time, stay safe and get out there and train.